Hi and welcome to this Module 3 of the Introduction to Counselling Skills. This module is looking at the core conditions and counselling skills development. I'm going to take you through now the core counselling skills and exactly what they are and what's involved. So we generally identify 9 core counselling skills. These are unconditional positive regard, genuineness, empathetic understanding, and different forms of communication and listening, including active listening, questioning, paraphrasing, reflecting, summarising, and challenge. I'm going to take you through each one of these in turn so that you've got a better understanding of them. So you remember from the previous module that you did on theory about the work of Carl Rogers. Well, he identified that 3 core conditions must be present in any therapeutic relationship. These 3 core conditions were unconditional positive regard, genuineness, and empathetic understanding. He believed that if a counsellor or helper is skilled in these areas, they create the right environment where a client can grow, heal, and move forward positively. He was one of the first psychologists to really look at the relationship between the counsellor and the client. He saw this as a partnership, and that the client is the expert of themselves, and the role of the counsellor is to provide the right conditions so that change can take place. Another eminent psychologist is Egan. He agreed with a lot of what Carl Rogers had promoted and developed, but he thought that in addition to the 3 core conditions, the counsellors also need to help clients make decisions, set goals, and support them to implement their actions. Egan developed a 3-stage model, which we will cover at some point. These 3 stages essentially involve stage 1, which is getting the story. So applying the skills that you're going to cover in this module will help you understand how you get the client's story. In stage 2, Egan talked about developing the possibilities of change. The skills you're going to learn in this module is all about the client realising that they actually do have decisions and choices that they can make, and that feeling of being in control of your life is so important for people to move on to the next stage. In stage 3, Egan talked about the strategies for change and how important it is to have a proper closing session. Again, these elements will be covered in the course. This module is very much about the skills you need to develop to get the client's story, build the right conditions so change is possible, and then how you support a client making the changes they want to make so that they're able to move on after therapy and cope on their own. Some of this slide recaps some of the information we did in the theory module. So just as a recap, the 3 core conditions, remember they are inextricably woven together, and the absence of any one of these conditions can impact on the ability of a client to open up, to talk about their story, and to feel safe to explore the changes they want to make. Irrespective of which theory you may or may not approach counselling from, these core conditions are constants in all the work that we do. As counsellors, we recognise that we are the ones who make the difference as to whether these core conditions are developed and maintained throughout therapy. So let's remind ourselves about what unconditional positive regard is. UPR is when you accept someone with no conditions or judgments. It is easier said than done, and each of us will bring our own experiences, our own values about what's right or wrong, and sometimes we will find ourselves judging our clients. This is not the client's issue, this is ours. We have to accept that we will judge other people, but it's so important that we work on our own belief systems so that we're able to be open and honest with our clients and able to see them as individual human beings. And remembering that their experience is not ours, and we do not have to have the same belief system in order to be a support for them. Some people have never experienced unconditional positive regard in their lives. When they do experience it, it can be very profound, uplifting, and very freeing. Being accepted for who you are can give people that space they need to take responsibility for themselves and can help them to make the changes that they want to make. So as another reminder, the second core condition is genuineness or congruence. And this is about being open and honest with ourselves and being genuine. Our approach to the client is influenced by how open we are with ourselves. An effective helper needs to continually work on reaching a position where they are known to themselves and others. You remember in the very first module we looked at the Johari window. We need to realise that we are not the expert of someone else. We are as vulnerable and as flawed as the next person. Encouraging reflection and self-awareness is an important part of your role, so that you're comfortable about your own inner world, and then from here you can genuinely accept someone else. Clients often uncover unknown things about ourselves. A client might share something with you and you have a strong reaction that surprises you. You need to address these areas if you're to be fully open and not damage the client by showing judgment. Again, a quick recap on the third core condition is empathy. Empathy, as you'll remember, is defined as being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, both emotionally and mentally. Many therapists talk about walking alongside the client in their experiences. Studies have shown that showing empathy results in greater levels of trust between the client and the counsellor or helper, and it can create environments where clients can begin to understand themselves and their issues much better. Remember how we can show empathy to the client. It includes things like not interrupting them or jumping in when they're talking, not dismissing their views, not being judgmental, understanding the client's experience but in their terms, and not getting muddled up about what their experience is compared to your own. It's also about not talking too much. Being empathetic is both communicating verbally and through body language, and the client from here will begin to see that you respect them and that you're trying to understand what they are thinking, rather than assuming what you think they know. Being empathetic comes easier to some people than others, but I do believe with practice, all of us can become more empathetic in the work that we do. So when these three core conditions are present, it creates what's called a therapeutic alliance, a partnership between the therapist and the client. This is not a constant state, and the therapist has to continually work to maintain this environment so the client feels safe, supported, and not judged. So how exactly do we establish this therapeutic relationship? Well, we apply a whole range of specific counselling skills. Some you'll find come naturally to you, and others you will have to practice until they feel like second nature. So let's start looking at the skills you need to develop. You may have heard about the term rapport. Well, rapport is about establishing a connection with another person. It's a central part of developing a relationship with the person you're helping. Achieving rapport cannot be done alone by using conversation. Conversation, surprisingly, only accounts for 7% of our communication with each other. We each read our body language, we feel tension in the room, we look for facial expressions to change, we get feelings about someone else, and we decide if they like us or not. This begins the moment you have contact with a client. This includes phone calls, emails, how you greet them when they arrive, and how you introduce yourself, and where you meet them. Part of establishing rapport and demonstrating empathy is through the skill of active listening. Active listening includes listening with your ears to what's being said and reflecting back what's said, summarising and seeking clarification. It's also about focusing all your senses to pick up on what the client is communicating to you. So you need to observe body language of the client and matching it, listening to the client's tone of voice, the pace of their speech, and how they talk. Are they confident? Are they afraid? Or are they timid? Responding to them through non-verbal cues such as eye contact, leaning forward, and responding with verbal cues such as, ah yes, I see, sure, I think I understand. These types of verbal cues help demonstrate to the client that you're truly listening to them. You need to not only say what they have said, but you need to demonstrate it through your own body language. So for example, if a client is quietly spoken, you might match their tone of voice rather than being loud and brash. If a client smiles at you when they arrive, you smile back. By listening carefully to all the clues you're given, both verbal and non-verbal, you can begin to gain an understanding of the client, and they can make a connection with you. This is a checklist I found useful when I was first starting out and developing my skills. This helps give you a guide to what we call attending behaviours. I use this as a mental note to check how I'm sitting, how the room's set up. Does it feel welcoming? Does it feel too formal, or is it too informal? So having an environment that's appropriate, so for example an office space that's tidy and free from interruptions, is really important. Sitting next to someone without a barrier in between you, such as a desk, can also make a difference as to how you communicate with each other. Many counsellors adopt what's called the 5 o'clock seating position in relation to the client. It's really important to have an open posture. This is open body language. So watching my posture so I don't have folded arms, which can sometimes look defensive and make the client feel uncomfortable. Remembering to offer them a warm welcome and introduce yourself properly, telling them your name and showing them where to sit can make all the difference in making someone feel more comfortable. Using encouraging responses, including non-verbal ones such as nodding or smiling. It's really important that you avoid distractions and that you give people your full attention. So don't start looking out the window when someone's in mid-flow. Maintaining eye contact is really important, but remember not to stare at someone. Suspending judgment by not reflecting them in your facial or body language is really important. Be aware of all your body movements. Exhibiting non-attending behaviours can very quickly stop rapport developing. These include fidgeting with paperwork or objects, looking away when someone's speaking, closing your body language by folding your arms and legs, doodling or writing notes, especially if they're not necessary. Yawning or looking bored is never a good look for a counsellor. Looking at your watch or being preoccupied with something else. Closing your eyes when someone speaks. Yes, I have seen people do this. Your posture is important, so don't be slumped over or holding on to your own head, because it can look way too casual. By adopting these attending behaviours, you can begin to provide the client with a safe space to express what's going on for them. This then begins to give you an insight into their world, the client's here and now. Without rapport, the client is unlikely to share their true feelings. Remember that people are conditioned socially to behave in certain ways to gain acceptance, and people will behave in ways they have learnt that help them gain acceptance from others. If they think they're going to be judged, or they feel embarrassed, or you look embarrassed with what they're telling you, they will resist telling you what's troubling them. Remember, the client will be alert to the clues about what you think of them, and if a negative reaction is detected, rapport can be lost in an instant, and the client may withdraw and tell you no more. This is where self-reflection and self-awareness are important for you as a therapist. So we're going to look now about some of the communication skills and things that you'll need to practice. When we have a conversation with someone, we often use a number of techniques, whether you do this consciously or unconsciously, and these techniques help us understand what that person is telling us. How we use these skills can help convey important information to the client. It tells them that we're listening and that we've understood them. These skills are an important aspect of maintaining good rapport and showing that we're empathetic. The counselling process requires a range of skills that are important, and questioning is one of them. It's important to use a number of questioning approaches, including the use of open and close-ended questions. Open-ended questions, for example, include things like, how is that important to you? What are the reasons for you saying this? These open-ended questions help encourage a client to open up, and they help you understand the client's story. Closed-ended questions also have their place. They result in specific answers like yes or no. So for example, you might ask a client, do you want that? This can help you determine specific outcomes that they want and set the boundaries for the work that you do with them. Reflecting skills are so important as well. Reflecting is when you're focusing on what the client is feeling and letting them hear it being said by another person. Some people explain this like holding up a mirror for the client to hear themselves. Sometimes this is the first time a client has heard their own voice saying how they feel about something. It can have different outcomes for clients, including to show that you have understood your client, to validate another person's feelings. It can also enable someone to understand themselves better. When someone needs help in expressing their thoughts and feelings, reflection of what they have said can be very helpful. It can also help someone when they're trying to solve a problem. It can also help in establishing responsibility for their own feelings and responses when they hear their own voice. This can help the client realise that you are listening and you can check you're understanding them. Remember, feelings are expressed through body language and not just through what the client says. Clients may also express one feeling verbally when they actually mean something else. For example, I have had clients who are laughing when explaining a traumatic event, or they may be explaining something and holding their body very tightly. What often happens is a client can mirror the body language of the therapist, and therapists can mirror a client's body language to convey that they've heard them and understand that they are in pain. Remember that sometimes you do not need to say anything, and you can reflect and mirror someone else through your body. So some examples are when a therapist might say, I can see that you feel upset. You feel alone and don't see the point. I can see that you're finding this hard, and I can see that you look upset. I can see that this is causing you pain. These are just some of the examples of the ways that you can reflect back to the client what you have seen and felt from their experience. Another key skill is paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is really helpful. This is similar to reflecting, but it usually has a bit more content. And this content is reflected back, so when paraphrasing, it can take a little bit longer. So you might paraphrase at intervals throughout the therapy session. Paraphrasing responses may be tentative, even questioning in tone. They present the client's experience in a different way. We use paraphrasing to put the client's words into our own words, covering all the key information we think they have told us. This is a much shorter version of what they have said, and we check with them that we've understood them correctly. So the kind of paraphrases you might begin saying might begin with something like, so what I'm hearing is, and then you would summarise what you've heard the client saying, or you might start it by saying, if I understand you correctly, you're telling me that, and then you would start paraphrasing what you've heard them talking about. The thing to remember is that sometimes when a client first begins to talk, they may have so much to say that it's actually hard to pinpoint what it is they want to work on. This is when clarifying is really important. Ask them to clarify what is important for them to work on rather than assuming. So you might use different ways of broaching this with the client. So you might say, can I just check that I've understood you correctly? Or you might say, am I right in saying that this is what you want to work on? Or you might say, so I think I'm beginning to understand what you're saying. Is that right? These are skills that you'll develop over time, and sometimes it's helpful to write down some of these introductory sentences that can help break the ice for you and the client. Summarising is a really important aspect of communication. It's really helpful to summarise what's been shared. This helps both the helper and the client see how far they've got and gives a picture of the issues concerned. This also helps clear up any misunderstandings or highlights anything that maybe is missing from the client's story. Summarising reminds the client of the material that's been covered in the session. It's a reminder for the client of emotions maybe they've touched upon. It also helps to keep time boundaries. It checks understanding, and it can provide a really important link to the next session. So the things that you maybe begin that introduction of summarising, you might say something like, okay, so today we have talked about two things. These things are, and then you would explain what they are. Or you might say, so I believe we've agreed on the following based on today's sessions. And then you'd explain what those are and then check in with them to say, is that right? Is that your understanding as well? You also might introduce the summary by saying, the main things you want to work on are X and Y. Have I got that right? You might also say in the summary to begin with that I've heard what you've said so far, but I just need to check with you that based on what I've heard and what I understand, that this is what you want to focus on. Have I understood you correctly? Another area which needs to be exercised with some caution is challenging what the client has said. Challenging what the client has said has to be done with great care and should only be done when you're much more experienced and you have lots of practice under your belt. And this is when you're particularly supported by your supervisor. Challenging can be very useful, and it's used when you've identified discrepancies in the client's story. But it can be interpreted as confrontational and provoke some strong responses, which can be upsetting. Rapport can be lost instantly, and the client may not feel accepted or supported, so we exercise caution when questioning what the client has said to us. So that's all the main counselling skills that you'll need to practice and apply if you enter into a helping role. But remember, these skills are really useful and valuable, not just for counsellors, but for a whole raft of professions. This includes people who are teachers, nurses, religious leaders, people who work in human resources, and also people like funeral directors. It can also help in your life if you're an informal helper, whether you're a parent, a work colleague, or being a better friend. How all these people use these skills can really help people. They can help people open up about how they're feeling. They can help clients feel more valued. They can help you develop a space in which to work out what you want to do in your own life, and also helping those people that you're looking after to make decisions and access other support that they need. Applying these skills can help you enable a client to understand themselves better and help them to make their own decisions. These skills can help develop your own personal skills as well as the skills of your client. It can help build on the inner strength someone has and the confidence to cope and realise that you can make decisions about your own life. It can also help people find solutions to their problems and move forward positively with their lives. Applying counselling skills can help people make positive changes to their behaviour. So I have some suggestions about what you do before you embark on the next module. Practice developing your counselling skills. You can do this with family and friends and practicing things like the solar checklist. So this is all about active listening, positioning your body, being aware of your surroundings and making the environment a comfortable one for the person you're supporting. Practicing your skills of communication, whether that's paraphrasing, reflecting, and building rapport with another person. Another area for you to practice is about observation, observing the body language of other people. Notice what you can learn about someone else and what they're feeling just by noticing the subtle changes in their facial expressions, body language, or tone of voice. What I can promise you is by beginning to apply these skills, you'll never see the world in quite the same way again.